So this next guest of ours, Raphaël Lheureux, is a CSIRT and pen testing team leader at Cysica, and he will talk to us about something that I believe is very important, not just as a principle, but also when you actually get to apply it, which is working with boundaries and figuring out how to make the most impact, and also kind of building that muscle that helps you prioritize, which is such a crucial skill in this field. Raphaël, thank you for joining us. Welcome to DefCamp. We're excited to have your presentation, to listen to it, to learn from you. So thanks so much. So we're back. I know that, thank you for sitting tight. As always, things happen, but collaboration makes technology work at the end of the day. So Raphaël, thank you so much for hanging on as well. So the stage is now yours. I'm more than happy to have you here. We can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon, DefCamp. I'm very glad to be here. A big thank you to the organization for setting up this event and for switching it to a virtual setting. You see, this brings a lot of difficulties, but as Andrea already indicated, together we will generally find a way to get things going. So also thank you for joining this talk. Today I'll be talking about how to leverage threat intelligence in the selection and prioritization of detection sources. Maybe a very quick who am I? My name is Raphaël Lheureux, as I've already been introduced. I'm the CSIRT and pen testing team lead at Cysica. In terms of education, I hold a master, not very typically, in applied economic sciences. I've followed a lot of trainings along the years in IT and security fields, from vendor trainings in Microsoft, Cisco, forensics, pen testing, development, scripting, etc. Also did crisis management trainings because that was a big part of the first half of my time at my previous job. I hold a couple of certificates, the mandatory CISSP to open HR doors. I hold some GX certifications, as you can see here in the slide. And in terms of experience, I started out as an independent IT and security service provider for small and medium enterprises. I did that for about 2 years, and then I moved on to a consultancy role at BNP Paribas Fortis, a large Western European bank, where I spent a year in IT, then about 6.5 years in CERT-related activities, IT and security, incident and crisis management. And then I went on to about 5 years of building and leading the CSIRT in the global security division of that bank. And now, since about a year, I've moved, a little over a year now, I've moved to Cysica, an MSSP, where I'm leading the CSIRT and pen testing teams. So what's the problem that I want to discuss with you today? Both in my previous job, so both at the bank, BNP Paribas Fortis, where I used to work, and now at Cysica, where I'm confronted with a myriad of different customers. There is a recurring question that arises each time we're setting up a security monitoring or a detection and response service. All of these organizations have usually a wide array of potential detection sources. They have system logs from all the systems in their network. They go from Windows event logs. Some companies already added Sysmon on top. They have Linux servers with a lot of interesting log files in their VAR log file system. There's security control logs from Active Directory over antivirus, EDR, firewalls, IDS, IPS, web application firewalls, cloud solutions like a lot of the typical cloud providers are now offering. For example, Microsoft has specific cloud security controls for their cloud setups. And then the higher profile high confidentiality organizations, like, for example, banks, they usually also have file integrity monitoring and more advanced, more granular security controls as well. On top of that, there's the other ones that are not necessarily security related. You have network logs and statistics like DNS, for example, or like NetFlow data. Cloud logs and statistics, we all know the cloud apps that are registering where we're connecting or authenticating from, what devices we are using, what time frame we are logging in. Usually this is generally coupled with machine learning to establish a baseline and identify outlying behavior. There's also application logs, both from externally developed and internally developed applications. And on top of that, the MSSPs and vendors in the field are offering a huge amount of possibilities to add detection sources on top of that. The problem today is we cannot implement them all in a timely and in a cost-effective manner. We need to make choices. There is, so far I haven't met a company that has an unlimited budget, an unlimited amount of people, an unlimited amount of time to implement something. So we need to take this into account. And then the question arises, which of these detection sources will we select and which ones will we implement first even? So that's a selection and prioritization of those detection sources that I want to talk about today. That's the problem. Now, what's the solution? I think an important solution here is to increase the effort that we're putting in an activity that's generally referred to as threat modeling. Threat modeling is slowly becoming a bit of a buzzword, I think. It's maybe not the most popular one, but it's one that I hear often, and a lot of people are now talking about it, but few are actually doing it. A lot of people have wild theories about how you could do threat modeling, and this generally ends up in very complex approaches, very difficult to put in motion, very costly also. But I think we can keep this type of activity, this type of initiative, relatively simple as well. And so in that spirit, I've tried to condense it in a definition to reflect that straightforward approach that I want to present to you guys today. So I came up with leveraging internal and external threat intelligence sources to identify threats that are relevant to the organization for which we are creating the threat profile, as well as the tactics, techniques, and procedures, the TTPs, that are used by these threat actors. So all good, but if it's that simple, how do we do it? Well, first of all, let's have a look at the different threat intelligence sources that we can take into account. As I said in the previous slide, there's external and internal threat intelligence sources. The most important one, and that I think that nowadays nearly everyone knows, and the one that don't know it very well, I've certainly heard about it, is the MicroAttack framework. For the ones that don't know it or don't know it very well, I will explain in the next slide very quickly what its purpose is. There's also a lot of external threat intelligence providers. You have paid threat intelligence providers. We all know some names like Recorded Future, for example, big organizations that are specializing in threat intelligence, that are providing this as a service to both customers directly and via MSSPs. But there's also free threat intelligence feeds that are providing TTPs and IOCs, for example, in the form of threat intel feeds that you can then onboard in free and open source platforms like MISP, for example. There's blogs and articles. The internet is full of them. Vendors do it. Cybersecurity rock stars have their own blogs now where they are presenting all of their findings or writing about all of their experiences. And last but not least, there's academic research, which is also very interesting because it's generally not under such budget and time pressure as commercial initiatives are. And academic researchers often go into a more theoretical, but also a more in-depth approach in their research and their investigations. Now, next to that, there's also internal threat intelligence sources. And I think that for most organizations, historical incidents are the most important internal threat intelligence source. The organizations that in the past have dared to leave an RDP service exposed on the internet, for example, they have surely encountered incidents around this, and they have drawn lessons learned from this. They have drawn conclusions from this. And they have found indicators of compromise. They have found TTPs during those incidents. But even more important in terms of internal threat intelligence is, in my opinion, what MSSPs are experiencing when they're doing security monitoring, digital forensics, incident response, and threat hunting. for the many different customers that they have. So they have a broader view. They see much more threat intelligence in the form of TTPs and IOCs than your typical organization would do. So let's first very quickly summarize what the MicroAttack framework is. It started out as a threat intelligence framework to track advanced persistent threats, APTs. And it has become much more in the meantime, but that was the original setup. And they refer to APTs, which are the threat actors and that materialize all of these threats that we're talking about. They refer to them as groups. So APTs in MITRE are called groups. The phases of the attack kill chain, like the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, and the phases that exist in this kill chain, they are referred to as tactics in MITRE, and they are slightly reworked, of course, they're not the exact same. So these tactics are, they start with reconnaissance and resource development, they go into initial access, execution, persistence, etc. And then inside each of these tactics, very specific techniques are described that are conducted by these threat actors, by these groups, in each of the tactics, in each of the phases. Now, 2 years ago, MITRE has changed its approach. These techniques have been sometimes, when the techniques were very granular, they have been grouped, they have been called sub-techniques and grouped into a broader technique. And sometimes when a technique was a bit too broad, they've broken it down into several sub-techniques. Then there's the procedures. The procedures are a very precise description of how a specific group executes one of these techniques or sub-techniques. So how a threat actor goes about doing it, just like our procedures in day-to-day work, there are very precise descriptions of how something is executed. So for example, rather than saying this is domain account, this is discovery of domain accounts, which would be the technique, the procedure says, this threat actor, for example, Wizard Spider, executes this technique by running a tool called Bloodhound or running a tool called AD-Find. And that brings us to the last type of record that exists in the MicroAttack framework, which is software. That software can be a legitimate software, like what I just mentioned. AD-Find is just an AD querying tool that exists.
Raphael, sorry to interrupt just a second. You're breaking up just a little bit in terms of internet connection, I mean. So, yeah, maybe, hopefully things were stabilized. Sorry to break your flow.
No problem. Can you hear me well again now?
Yes, you're fine now, but I find that if you try to like slow down the pace just a little bit, that might give it a chance to catch up. I know, I'm a big talker as well.
No problem, no problem. I'll try to to decrease the pace a bit. All right. I'll repeat the last part. So the third type of software that could be that exists is malware. For example, could be droppers and loader or actual malwares that are being deployed by these groups. There were examples like Bazaar Loader or TrickBot or Ryuk or Conti that we will address further along in the presentation. So this is the visual representation that MicroAttack has chosen. They chose to visualize all of these techniques into matrices. There's several of them. There's also an industrial control system one. There is one for mobile systems. There is one for cloud. But this is the one for enterprises, and it's the most used one. It's the one that is the broadest. It's more representative for organizations. So as you can see, each of these columns represent a tactic or a phase, if you like, from reconnaissance over resource development up until the very last phases like command and control, exfiltration, and impact. And inside each of these tactics, each of these phases, you see the techniques, and the ones that have a little dark gray marker at the end are actually techniques that if you would expand them, they would show the sub-techniques that are represented there, and the little number behind the technique name between brackets is the amount of sub-techniques that are that exist under each of these techniques. I couldn't expand them here. I had to collapse it because if you expand the sub-techniques, it becomes so large that it's not usable for slideshow. So then all of this, how could we go about and doing it? Because it's very interesting, this MicroAttack framework, but I think that the best way to explain how you can use this for threat modeling is by using an example. I'm a big fan of Mr. Robot, but I really find that we use the Evil Corp way too often for as an example in presentations as a mock company. So I came up with another one that I called Nice Corp, and I've tried to describe a bit of the company profile here, just to give an example. So let's say that Nice Corp is a fintech company. So usually fintech companies are IT companies that are providing IT-based services for or with the financial industry. This company is located and active in the United States of America. They work closely together with government open banking APIs. So they do calls to APIs that are exposed by the banks, for example, to get account history or account balance or transaction history from a bank account. Quick recap of the last things that I was saying. So Nice Corp is working together closely with governments in terms of e-identification of their customers. They're leveraging open banking APIs, so doing calls to the APIs that banks expose in the spirit of the open banking initiative. Nice Corp has also recently been hit by Conti ransomware, like so many companies in different industries and different geographical locations. And a partner company of them has been hit by Ryuk ransomware, and now obviously, as you can imagine, their management is very worried about the future. About future attacks, and their cyber insurance company is very worried about ransomware specifically. So they want to increase their resilience and their detection rate against these attacks. So, okay, now my slideshow doesn't. All right. So how can you practically go about using that MicroAttack framework now to identify the techniques in that nice enterprise matrix that are relevant to the company that you are making the threat profile for? First of all, and I found that this was it was easiest to take all of the group information, the entire table with the information on groups, on threat actors from MITRE, and copying it into an Excel file. And then looking at the profile of the company for which we are identifying all the threats and techniques, and start marking in green all of the relevant aspects that you can find in the descriptions of these threat actors. So you can start looking at, for example, whether threat actors are targeting the technology industry, are targeting the banking industry, are targeting governments. So in terms of the industries that they are targeting. You can also have a look at the countries, the geographical locations that they are targeting. For example, here I made some, in green I marked in some of the threat actors, NATO member countries, North America, United States of America, all of these references. At the very bottom, Wizard Spider was included because it's an APT that's very well known for ransomware campaigns, which was also one of the big topics for Nice Corp. And then I found that if you end up with too many groups in the list, an interesting way is to go back to see the ones that you have made green markings in and look at things that are potentially indicators of those groups better being excluded from the threat profile. Like, for example, you can see Blind Eagle on the fourth row. It does target government institutions, but mainly Colombian government institutions. So for organization that is located and active in the United States of America, it might just be less relevant. That's a bit of a balancing exercise that the threat intelligence analyst needs to take into account. Then, from those threat actors, from all those groups that you've identified, you can zoom in on them a bit more, so go a bit further than the general description. Look at the software that they are using, and you will see that there will already be some matches. For example, if you look at Wizard Spider here, I took a very small screenshot of 4 of the many software references that are linked to Wizard Spider. So you can see that they are leveraging Cobalt Strike, a very popular pen testing framework, Conti ransomware, Dire ransomware, and Emotet. You can see that these software items also have a table where they are referencing all the different techniques that they are using. So these techniques are potentially interesting to add to the threat profile as well. And from these different pieces of software, you can often see that they will link back to other malware or other software, and sometimes the malware that is used to deliver this malware. For example, you can see here with Conti that it's being distributed via TrickBot. So on below in the list, you can add TrickBot and then go look a bit deeper into what TrickBot is all about. There you can see that TrickBot is possibly a successor of Dire. So Dire can be included. You can see also that it makes reference to groups. We'll come back to that in the next slide. And in the second row, you see that for Ryuk, for example, there's an indication that there are code similarities with Hermes ransomware. So you can expect that techniques will overlap there as well. And then the last, I zoomed in a bit on the last example where with TrickBot, you would find the reference to Wizard Spider, say that you wouldn't have had Wizard Spider on your radar as a threat, as a relevant threat actor. You would eventually run into it through the chain going through Conti, which is being distributed by TrickBot, and then TrickBot, which is being leveraged by Wizard Spider. Another approach that you can use as well is then zoom in again on that threat actor and see which software they use. Which group that uses this software. So in the case of TrickBot, you will see that not only Wizard Spider, but also TA505 is a threat actor that leverages this software. And you could therefore include TA505 as well, depending whether you see a lot of overlaps with the threat profile of your of the company for which you are making the profile. Then you can, next to the MicroAttack framework, also consult other threat intelligence sources, external threat intelligence sources, that is. I just put a couple of screenshots here to give you an idea of how easy it is to find information on the internet, on the public internet for this. I just used Conti as an example. At the upper left corner, you see a report from CISA where they are enumerating all of the MicroAttack techniques with their T number, with their T reference, and explaining how Conti is conducting those. The bottom left, you can see a Sophos Lab report extract where they, per tactic, they have listed all of the products, all of the software that is being used by the Conti ransomware operators. On the top right is Alien Vault, where you can see if you look for Conti, you can see that they have about 1,000 pulses, which are basically like threat intel feeds. They have 13,000 indicators of compromise. They link Conti to 12 malware families, etc. So there you can zoom in, you can find IOCs, you can again find other TTPs. In the middle, the blue screenshot is from AnyRun. It's an online sandbox where you can also look through the public submission. So everyone who has submitted a sample there to run in this online sandbox and that has set it to public, you can find them back and you can find the results. And you will see that if you open the report of each of these sandbox runs, the report even contains also references to all of the techniques of the MicroAttack framework. And then lastly, on the bottom right, I looked up Conti in VirusTotal, and there generally there are some indicators like the hashes and the verdict of VirusTotal, which is already interesting. But in the comments, in the community section, you will see a lot of references by security researchers and analysts that on a daily basis are working with this. And this screenshot was made a couple of days ago, and you see that just an hour before I made the screenshot, there were still Conti samples being tested and reports and findings on them being posted. It will also often include references to other sandboxes like Joe's Sandbox, etc. It's also very interesting to look at these external threat intelligence sources to dig deeper into the software or the threat actors or the TTPs that you are investigating for the threat profile. Okay. Then last but not least, after all of this external threat intelligence, there's also the internal threat intelligence. I have to say that I found, and this is completely normal, that non-MSSP organizations will have a less amount of threat intelligence coming from their internal practices. It's normal because hopefully organizations that are not MSSPs, just like the bank that I worked for during several years, hopefully they don't have too many incidents, they don't have too many detections that they can draw threat intelligence from security monitoring. It could be hopefully everything has been prevented and it's just from your security monitoring, but they don't typically do a lot of incident response or digital forensics, at least not in depth, or and also less threat hunting or less variations in threat hunting than typical MSSP would be conducting. Whereas an MSSP is servicing many different customers, and they do they have more. They are in better place to identify new TTPs or new modus operandi or trends that they are that are in being observed in the wild. So, for example, with new TTPs, just a couple of months ago, I think about 5 or 6 months ago, somewhere in summer, process ghosting has been identified as a new technique. It's not yet included in the MicroAttack framework as a specific sub-technique of the process injection technique, which I expect that it will become part of in the future. Is actually an evolution of process double ganging. So that's a new TTP that's already being detected in the wild, but that's not yet in the MicroAttack framework. New modus operandi. For example, lately we've encountered a lot of Conti ransomware operators that are when they fail to deploy the ransomware successfully or encrypt a significant part of the data in the customer's network, they fall back to a sort of bluff poker game where they create fake evidence of data being exfiltrated, and then they try this way to send it to management or to representatives or stakeholders of the company to try to force them into paying a ransom while they actually don't even have this while they don't even have exfiltrated data from the company. And then another trend that we, for example, see is that Conti ransomware operators are the skill set that they are using is decreasing. A couple of months ago, this was also confirmed by a document that leaked on the internet. It was a disgruntled affiliate of a Conti ransomware gang who posted the manuals, the instructions that are created for the ransomware operators, the Conti ransomware operators. And you can see from these instructions that they are very much oriented at non-specialists. So it's very clear that a subset of very advanced attackers are generating or acquiring the access to different companies, and they are creating these manuals, but they are selling the accesses, or they are monetizing through a sort of pyramid scheme these accesses by letting less advanced operators execute a checklist of instructions that they have prepared. Another thing, another interesting part of internal threat intelligence is that you can include TTPs that are popular with these less advanced, more opportunistic attackers, but are no longer tracked in MITRA because APTs are no longer or never actually use them. A good example of this is, for example, network service scanning. When you're creating a threat profile based on APTs, on modern APTs, so APTs that have been active in the last few years, you will see that network service scanning will often not appear in the techniques that are tagged when you select these threat actors, while it's actually a technique that for opportunistic attackers, less advanced attackers, very often is used. And that's something that MSSPs generally, this feeling with the attacks that occur on a daily basis, this lives with MSSPs. They discover this type of trend through their security practices. So MISRA created the Navigator. On their GitHub page, you can see the Navigator for the MicroAttack Matrix. It's a very interesting tool because now that you have selected all of these techniques that are used by all these threat actors that you want to include in your threat model, you can map them. As you can see here, I did it with a coloring scheme. So this is the result of 5 threat actors being selected and some techniques being added that don't even belong to those threat actors. The less advanced one, we added them manually. And here I added a color grading. It's not very important because I never used scoring of those techniques, but you could, for example, use different scoring and different coloring based on how often these techniques occur. So, for example, if one of your threat actors, that's the way that it's presented here, if one of the threat actors was using that technique, it's presented in green. If 2 are using it, it's yellow, 3 is orange, 4 is red, and the fuchsia color is the one technique that was used by all 5 of the threat actors that were taken into account. You could use this to prioritize even the techniques that are used by more threat actors, but we didn't go about it in this exercise because it was because we found that the amount of techniques was still very usable. Then, for all of these techniques, you can, as you can see here, for example, under the technique OS credential dumping, there's a sub-technique Alsace memory credential dumping. You can go and zoom in the MicroAttack framework and look at how to detect these techniques and what are the data sources that you need to detect this technique being executed. And you will see that for Alsace memory credential dumping, you would require command execution, operating system API execution, process access, process creation, etc. So this is a very important part of the exercise because you need to identify for all the techniques that you have added to the threat profile, you need to identify what detection sources you need exactly to be able to detect them adequately. There is a nice little tool that exists to do this. If this wouldn't exist, you would have to go and look in each one of the techniques that you have now tagged nicely in your MicroAttack Navigator. You would have to go and zoom in on each one and list all of the data sources that you can use to detect them. Luckily, 2 very nice guys that work at the Rabobank Cyber Defense Center, they've created a tool that's called Detect. And it's actually a set of Python scripts. They do more than only this, but the part of it that I want to talk about today is the script that they can be used to translate this JSON layer that you see on the left. So the MicroAttack Navigator matrix that has been colored, you can save this layer in a JSON file, and that JSON file you can translate through that Python script into a list that does a count of all the data sources that can be used to detect all of these techniques. So you can see here, this is an example. This is not related to NICE Corp or to an exercise that we did. I took these screenshots from their GitHub page. But so on the left, you see MicroAttack Navigator that's filled in. The JSON layer has been exported. And then through this detect Python script has been translated into a list that counts how many times command execution appears as a data source in all of these techniques that you see on the left. So command execution could be used to detect 243 of the techniques that are colored on the left. Process creation as a data source can be used for 197, etc. Now, these data sources are they're very granular, but they are not translated directly to some log. It doesn't say, for example, it says process creation, but what this framework does not do for you is, for example, telling you that process creation is something that you could detect with a detection source like Sysmon. So the data source process creation is part of the detection source Sysmon, for example. It's very important that in an exercise where you want to decide on these detection sources, you also list all the detection sources for this data that are already present in the organization. And like I said at the beginning of the presentation, you might already have Windows event logs, you might have Sysmon, you might want to look at your firewall logs, etc. But on top of that, you also need to take into account, and again, that's the job of the threat intelligence analyst, you need to take into account also the detection sources that are offered and preferably mastered by your MSP or MSSP or several of your MSSPs. And even thirdly, look at the ones that are available on the market, because it's not because you don't have it present in the organization or because your MSSP is not offering it, that maybe another vendor in the market is not offering something very interesting that you would like to include or deploy as a new detection source. So that all of that is part of the threat intelligence analyst's job. Now, it's not important to have this described on the same level. This can be log types, this can be product types. You can say product type is EDR, but you can also talk about a very specific product. You can talk about Microsoft Defender for endpoint or CrowdStrike Falcon as an EDR, but you can also reference specific security solutions like an anti-ransomware solution or something from the Microsoft cloud stack, like Defender for Identity. You can describe them at any level that is fit for your organization and then list them. This is an example of a list that you could create, a list of potential detection sources. Here we kept it a bit generic. For example, you see the two ones for that are tagged with availability on the MSSP side. Defender for Identity is a very specific Active Directory, or on-prem Active Directory detection source, but EDR solution, your MSSP might, for example, offer two different EDR products. You can describe it as a product type, and then later on choose what it is that you want to pursue from your MSSP. So just another couple of examples here listed, but this is the format in which we've listed or enumerated these detection sources so far. Now is the point where these the data sources that we have enumerated using the detect Python script, and the ones that we need to detect all of the techniques that we've added to the threat profile need to be linked to the products that we have on our radar, that we have internally, that our MSSPs are offering, or that we are thinking about buying in the market. Generally, this is an exercise that I'd say is half of this is experience and knowledge of the analyst. But of course, there is a documented basis for this as well. All of these logs, all of these products have their documentation, like Sysmon. There's endless documentation and tutorials on Sysmon that describes all of the different event IDs, that describes all of the different data sources that you could find in there. And so that's very useful. It becomes a bit different with products, because what we're noticing is that some of those products are becoming more of black boxes, where what they are detecting is not exhaustively enumerated by the vendor, because it's the internal recipe of the vendor. For example, with EDR solutions, this is the case. EDR solutions the EDR vendor will not give you a list and say, here are the 500 techniques or the 500 signatures or the 500 rules that we have to trigger on. It's also not that simple, because EDR solutions typically take into account machine learning, etc. So it's not that simple for an organization to present you with an exhaustive list of everything that will be detected by their EDR solution. There's another option for these, and that's to actually go about testing these solutions against several techniques. Now, this testing can be done through red or purple teaming, but there's also a lot of initiatives that you can find on the internet. MISRA evaluations, for example, is one. And we'll come back to that in one of the next slides. But MISRA evaluations uses a set of selected technique, a threat profile that they create every year based on a specific threat actor. And then they test all of the the popular security tools against those the techniques that are employed by these threat actors. So that's also a good way to cover the tools for which you don't have an exhaustive list or very detailed documentation. So as an example exercise to show you what this looks like, what could be the outcome of such an exercise, we actually took, and this is an exercise that we did for customers of ours, we took the 6 APT groups that the MicroAttack evaluations have used in the last 4 years. So you see in 2018 and 2019, you will no longer find them on the MicroAttack evaluations webpage. They have been classified now. But in 2018, they used APT3 as the representative threat actor. 2019, they used APT29. In 2020, they used Carbonac and Fin7, which is basically considered as one big threat actor. They are separate threat actors in the MicroAttack framework, but they're so closely linked that they were used together in 2020. Very representative for the banking threat profile. And then this year is still ongoing. They used Wizard Spider, very representative for the ongoing ransomware attacks in the last few years, and Sandworm. Also Sandworm referenced as Sandworm team very often. On top of that, we added some techniques that we observed that were used by less advanced and more opportunistic attackers, but then they're very popular with these attackers. Like, for example, network service scanning. We did include it in the exercise while it was not part of any of these APT's techniques. And then we went and excluded some techniques from all of the techniques from the reconnaissance and resource development tactics. They're chronologically, they are the 2 first tactics. And they are the ones that are typically conducted outside of the visibility scope of the organization. Whenever someone is setting up phishing websites, setting up servers, developing malware, that's done in a way that is not detectable from inside the organization, it's not in the network. We have other solutions for that, which we call brand intelligence monitoring, where we're going to monitor SSL certificate registrations and DNS registrations that are using variants of the brand names of our customers, etc. But we didn't include them here because this was an exercise very specifically oriented at what we could detect inside an organization with SIEM solutions and other security solutions inside the network. Now, this resulted in a threat profile of a total of 163 techniques being selected. You can see this was actually the one that I used a bit earlier as well. That's what this Navigator visualization came from. Now, it doesn't look like that many techniques in this in this view, but remember that this is the collapsed view. So if I expand all of the techniques, all of the techniques would become visible with their coloring scheme. So this Navigator visualization was saved into a JSON layer, transformed with the detect.py script into the list of data sources, and the data sources were translated into a list of logs and products that, and I took an example of one of the customers for whom we did this exercise, into this list of detection sources. And what we actually did was we ranked, I forgot to mention that in the previous slide, we ranked all of these tools as the first best, second best, third best, fourth best, etc. Solution to detect those techniques. And what you can see here in this matrix is very quickly, and I marked it in red, and it gradually goes down to green when the number is decreasing. But the EDR solution, and in this specific customer's case, the EDR solution that was on the radar was Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, was covering 56% of all the techniques in the threat profile as one of the, as the best solution. So MDE was the best solution to detect 56% of all of the techniques that were in the threat profile. Now, if we looked at it a bit further, we looked at all of the options where MDE could be a detection source for the technique, it even extends to 82% of all the techniques that we had added to the threat profile. So the conclusion for this customer was 82% of those selected techniques could in some way be detected by an EDR solution, but for 56 of them, EDR is even the best detection source. Defender for Identity was another product that was on their radar and that could cover up to 12% of the selected techniques in the threat profile. Firewall logs can cover up to 22% of the techniques. IDS, IDP could detect up to 21%, and DNS monitoring could cover up to 7%. So what you can imagine what the consequence on the customer side was. A new project was started and an EDR solution was deployed. So we actually deployed an EDR solution to replace their what previously was done based on Sysmon and in-house in-house developed detection logic. A project is being started to deploy Defender for Identity. On the firewall logs, we've zoomed in and discovered that we were only ingesting in the SIEM the internal firewall logs, so the external firewall logs have been added there as well. It's very important to leverage another part of threat intelligence, which are IOCs, known malicious IPs, known malicious domain names, etc. These are typically better detected on your external, so your internet-facing, your border firewalls. And then IDS and DNS monitoring are being looked into at the moment to see how they can be included in the setup, in the stack of this customer. So just to show how this exercise actually ended up in driving the initiatives, driving the new projects that have been initiated on the customer side. Now, last slide, a couple of remarks that I want to make. Threat modeling can be used for other purposes as well. It can be used to drive your threat hunting and red-purple teaming. Obviously, if you have created a threat profile of your or a threat model of your organization, you can identify the techniques that are not covered by your detection sources and therefore perform threat hunting specifically oriented at detecting them. You can also do red or purple teaming to highlight gaps in the or even highlight gaps in the detection, but also improve the detection, make it more granular, refine it, continuously improve it. You can use it to evaluate security products as the MISRA evaluations. It's not MicroAttack, but it's actually MISRA Ingenuity that is working on this. They are evaluating security products by threat modeling each year based on a threat actor that throughout that year their threat intelligence actors have identified as the most prevalent or the most representative threat actor. And you can also use it to research coverage in terms of specific threats. For example, we are now doing a purple teaming exercise where we're setting up all of the different EDR solutions that we have against the threat profile that we have created for ransomware campaigns of the last few years, and evaluating those different EDR solutions that we're offering to see which one covers all of the different techniques that are used by ransomware operators best or most exhaustively. Now, this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. We have a tendency in IT and in security to try to automate as much as possible, and I'm all for it. Wherever it's possible, I try to do it. This type of work is really something that an intelligent human being, preferably with some experience, has to conduct. So I'm a strong advocate of having this type of exercise conducted by threat intelligence analysts or SOC or CSIRT analysts that or SOC or cybersecurity architects, people that have the understanding of how SOC works and not too quickly jump to try to automate this with tools who will never have the same effect. So for me, the tailoring of this approach to match the goals of the exercise is a very important aspect of doing good threat modeling. And the last but not least, this presentation here has focused very much on detection. That's typical for us as SOC professionals, we always want to detect and respond. But a very important aspect is also in terms of lesson learned to look at the mitigation, because mitigation can sometimes be a better option rather than, for example, detecting and responding to the disabling of security tooling, the disabling of antivirus, the disabling of EDR or whatsoever. Mitigation can sometimes be a better or an equally good solution. Think about, for example, not running local admin, not giving local admin permissions to your users. This will make it much harder for an attacker to develop a malware or a loader, a stager that will, in the first stages of the attack, be able to deactivate the security tooling that you have in place and then continue to the next phase of the cyber kill chain. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I hope that was clear and of added value to the people that have attended.
Thanks so much, Rafael. Unfortunately, we do not have time to take questions because we're running quite a bit late. So we'll jump on to the next presentation. But thank you for this. And there are questions for you in the chat on track 1. So please check that out. I promise people that you'll get back to them directly there. Yeah. So thanks so much for this.
Surely, will do. Thank you a lot. Have a nice day.
Thank you. You as well.
Bye-bye.
So